Bill. Thanks for joining us. My pleasure. Thank you. So, I guess just to get right into it, can you walk us through your first real estate deal?
Well, I mean, there's different things to say about that, but after my first summer of law school in Montreal, where I was already too old because I had taken a bit of time after college to refresh myself, playing hockey in Europe, which was still the best year I ever had in terms of self, whatever, indulgence or in terms of just pure joy. But I came back to law school, and after the first summer, I was looking for a job in Montreal, called up an old buddy of mine from college, and he had just started out in the real estate business, and he said, well, why don't you just join us for the summer? So I joined a small company that's now become a big company called Canol. I bumped into the founder, John Wiener, in the hall that summer and asked me, who the hell are you? And then I was told that I had to lease a floor in a building they just built. And actually my first transaction I ever worked on was a failure. And he said, well, we have 8 stories. There's a vacant floor. You need to find a law firm. And I said, well, how do you do that? He says, take the yellow pages. What do you think? And I looked up in the yellow pages in law firms, and the first one started with AD. And so I got the phone number. I called out of the blue, and the receptionist answered. I said, could I speak to the managing partner? And she said, sure, hang on. Well, I was having my own private connection because I never thought I'd get through to the managing partner. I'm a law school guy. Managing partner is God in the legal business. So I thought, holy smokes. And sure enough, one of the gruffest humans I've ever encountered in my life answers the phone and goes, yeah. And I'm like, well, you're across the street, I see here, and we've just built a new building. I don't know if you're thinking of moving, but we have a whole floor. We'd love to see if we could accommodate you. And he said, yeah, well, you should come over and talk to me now because I'm about to sign up in a new building. And I thought, oh, geez, A, I got him on the phone, and B, now I have to go meet the guy.
So where was the building? What was the
Like on the corner of Peel and de Maisonneuve in Montreal. And that was the first building that Canol had ever built. And that's exactly the fact. My friend that was working for Canol said, hey, I'll pay you $5,000 if you want to come and work for the summer. I thought that was like, money enough to buy a house at that age. I couldn't afford to go to a movie in college. I thought that was a lot of money and that was going to be a great experience. And sure enough, here I am, first week on the job, going to meet a managing partner of a law firm, and I don't have any idea what to say. And so I say to the guy I'm working for, I said, what do I say? I said, tell him you'll beat any deal he's looking at. I mean, I'm getting early mentoring, from these guys. And I go over there and I sit with him, and he says, okay, well, make me a proposal. But now I have to go home back across the street and say, okay, guys, what's a proposal? And so, we put together what we thought was something competitive. And this guy, I know in retrospect what he did. He took our offer, went back to the building he wanted to be in and said, well, here, I got a competitive offer. And, you guys are now going to have to meet this. So I was just doing exactly what he wanted to do. He had no intention of coming to our building. Eventually, I had the guy I was working for come over. Then I had the owner come over. So I'm little me who they don't know, and the 2 big shots that I worked for with the managing partner. Of course, he ended up going to that other building with a better deal than he thought. But I ended up with, the greatest experience that a law school student could ever have in his first week on the job.
That was the first week?
That was first week.
How old were you at the time?
I was an old man. I finished college at 22. That was the summer of 82. So I finished in 78. 82, I was 27 years old.
Okay.
So I got this late start. And so, but by the way, I never went back to a class for my next 2 years of law school. Not one class. But I did finish 8 because in the 1 year I was there, I learned who the people are that made the best notes. And so I ended up going then to work for a law firm for 2 years. Decided I would actually go practice in Toronto, and got offers from a bunch of firms, accepted one. But when it really came time, I went back to my buddy who was in the real estate business, who had left Canol, and he was forming his own firm. And I said, okay, could I work with you? And the guy said, sure, I'll give you 5% of everything I make. And I thought, that's 5% more than I have today. I don't have any real, I just need to clothe myself and live. So that's fine by me. I'd like to work for, I don't want to work to get paid to come to work. I want to work to make money. And
Performance based.
totally. And when I was talking to him about that, I said, well, do you guys have any benefits? And he said, well, actually, yeah, one of my partner's brother is a dentist. And I'm like, okay, well, now I'm all in, I can get, low price dental care. It actually turned out that way. He was my dentist for a couple of decades. And that was fine. And that started, then I called a guy in Toronto. I said, I'm not going to come, and said, well, you're just a statistic. Don't worry about it. It happens. We hire guys that change their mind. But one day when you become a success, could you try and give us some legal work? I thought that was all pretty cool. So that was the first transaction I worked on. It failed. But then I started on a transaction which didn't fail. And that ended up to be the reconstruction of the Windsor Hotel. And we had got an option through an introduction to the owners of the hotel. It had been vacant 3 years. There was water on the floor. It was a swimming contest for the rats that were in the building most days. And it was the kind of thing where if you didn't get it renovated soon, it was going to have to be taken down, because buildings that aren't heated and they get full of moisture, that ruins the whole structure. But we were able, in no long period of time, got an architect, made it redesign, added some floors, and believe it or not, we're able to corral 2 large tenants. All of this before putting a shovel in the ground. We had the plans, we had the tenants, a law firm and an accounting firm. Then we went to borrow some money, and the people we wanted to borrow money from said, well, we'd rather develop it ourselves, a bank, and but we'd like to buy what you have created in terms of a pre-dev package. And we sold it to them. And I remember getting a check one night, 3 of us, maybe 4, but 3. Anyway, we got a check, and we were so freaked out because it's a 7-figure check, and we've been in business for exactly 2 years. My partner literally took the check in his briefcase and slept, put it under his bed, and we got up early in the morning and went to a bank. It was a registered check, just the same, cashed it in one bank, and then had the bank send it to another bank so we could be sure that we had the money. And then we started to make the little payouts, 5% here or 2% here. Got to pay the architect $60,000 for the work he's done, blah, blah, blah. And we went home with enough money to do the next deal.
So the Windsor Hotel I know really well because I had my high school graduation there.
Yeah.
And then my McGill graduation was also there.
Yeah.
And it was just abandoned on the corner of Peel and Innovative, just dead.
Actually, that what's now called the Windsor, or what is called the Windsor building, the actual Windsor Hotel was on the corner of Rennie-Lebec, where the CIBC building is. That building opened in, I think, 62, but on that site was the real Windsor Hotel. And what we call and was a grand hotel, turrets and all on top. And this, what's now the Windsor, was the annex to that hotel.
So like the where they do the meeting halls or whatever.
Yeah, it was really, well, it was like they were rooms too in the hotel, but we'd added floors to make it bigger. And it was the surviving back piece of the real majestic Windsor Hotel. So these conversions, right, which are all the rage, let's talk about converting. Well, that was early stages, converting a hotel to an office building. And at one point, the law firm had to get the, buy-in of all the partners. So they had a meeting one night.
The law firm you're trying to sign is ahead of?
Yeah, so the managing member of the firm stands up in front of all of his partners and says, I think what we got to do is we got to move to the Windsor Hotel. Well, one of the things that was interesting to them is we were putting a lot of money on the table as an inducement for them to come.
So a huge TI to renovate it the way they wanted it?
Well, it wasn't huge by today's standards, but it was huge by those days' standards.
Yeah.
Let's say it was $120, but let's say the work would only cost $60.
Okay.
So what happens to the rest?
Kettle's back.
Well, the partners can take all the capital.
Yeah.
Then they can borrow or renovate. So whoever's a partner, pretty interesting idea. They move and get a check, right?
Yeah.
So it's like, this is the best thing since sliced bread. And you know what? every office will be twice as big now because of the way the structure of this hotel is. The bad news is there'll be 3 people in every office. And then so the early days of, how you manage a law firm, I felt like after a few years in the business, law firms were calling me to talk about how they ought to do their deals. Because law firms are generally the highest paying tenants. And, today it's not uncommon to get a legal bill at $1,200 or $1,400 an hour and a lawyer. Think about that. Do the math. In those days, it was a lot less, but just the same, there was always a competition for talent. So there's always, one guy wants to build a better place than the next, especially these big firms with these big clients. And that was the early stages of doing something pretty dramatic. Both the accounting firm and the law firm, the people running them were minded to do something dramatic. So having their own atrium, having the kind of superb Chinese restaurant in that hotel for a long time, being able to have those 2 places where you could hold events and all of that, that was kind of a new thought at the time. It wasn't just another normal building. And so it got good play, and it was really exciting to be that young. I think when we finished that deal, I was 30. So it was maybe 1985 that we did that deal. And I thought that was a heck of an accomplishment. Funny thing is, my partner at the time, walked the 3 blocks down the street to Peel Street. And I remember standing with him one night, and he says, well, we've been involved in the Windsor Hotel. We had also subsequently, the money we got out of the Windsor, we took and made a deposit to buy the Ogilvy department store. And so now, the next thing, I'm standing on the corner of Sherbrooke and the Mountain with the same partner who had a vision. And he's like, well, gee, we did the Windsor, we did Ogilvy. Why don't we try to buy the Ritz? That was number 3.
Okay, so before we get there, because I like these deals a lot. Number one, you said you were done when you were 30. So it was a 2-year process. You guys tied up the Windsor, you bought it outright before doing all.
Oh, no, we tied it up. I don't even know if we put $1 down.
Okay, so you tied it up. While you tied it up to get entitlements and permittings, I guess, from the city, you work on these 2 major tenants.
Yeah.
And then you basically, like, you sold the whole package. You flipped the deal to someone else.
Yeah.
And from the moment you tied it up to then flipping it, 2 years went by.
It wasn't well, it could have been 2 years, actually. It feels like it was a little less than 2 years. But it actually was probably 2 years, because I was supposed to go back to law school in the fall of '84, and I didn't make it. And I had because I had 3 years, so I had my common law, and I was supposed to do 1 more. And I went and I did my exams in December. But then this deal was so hot, I just couldn't pay any attention to school. Ended up asking the dean for a postponement. And being a reasonable guy, not the kind of bureaucrats you run into today every day, he's like, yeah, take an extra 6 months. Then I asked for another 6 months. He said, sure, take another 6 months. The third time I asked, he said, Bill, be honest with me. You're probably never going to finish this, right? I said, well, you're probably right. He said, well, you've done enough. You have 1 degree, and let's call it a day. And so I think it did take really, it really did take 2 years.
How many square feet is the Windsor?
About 300,000 feet.
And how much was it tied up for, roughly?
Tied up for.
What was the purchase price?
Yeah. That, I honestly can't remember, but I think it was less than $100 a foot.
Nice. Downtown Montreal.
Yeah.
And then you wholesaled it to someone, or you signed it to someone.
We signed all our rights. The right to close on the building, the architectural contract, the insurance contract, the municipal approvals, everything. We just didn't have enough equity to even borrow. Like, we would have needed, let's say 25% of the overall equity to borrow 75%. We didn't have that 25% equity.
And the seller the whole time was okay with you guys being his buyer. You didn't have to make any representations of being able to close, or it was a little bit more.
We were lucky. The seller was a unique family, an old line Montreal family, and they knew my partner well. And you know, they thought it was probably, it wasn't a big monetary thing for them, kind of a leftover. And it was kind of like, give these guys a chance. You know, my whole career has been give these guys a chance. You know, you meet people who are, which I think is why I always feel you kind of have to run your life in a sort of a give back mode. You know, at some point, somebody took a chance on you. Well, I think you owe it back to the world. You owe it. It's not something you do because you're a nice guy. You have a debt to repay. There were people that took a chance on you. You better take a chance on people. I think I've felt that way from the day I started in the business. And that was a big part of that. This is a wealthy family. They didn't need to tie it up with us. They could have asked somebody to put a check on the table for 250 grand, which we didn't have. You know, they're willing to give us a chance to try to put it together.
Okay. And then you signed it, got a commission check of $1 million, and then deal number 2 was Ogilvy.
Yeah. So we took that money, and
Do you remember around how much was the?
I remember everything about it.
How much was it?
$6 million.
Nice. So from 28 to 30, and then this was 1985.
1985.
Okay. So now you guys have 6 mil, and there's a department store that's
We don't have 6 million. We have 1 million that we got,
yeah.
and we sign up to buy something that costs 6.
Okay.
Okay, but we didn't have 6,
Okay.
and we didn't have 3, and so let's say you can borrow half of the 6, you got to find 3.
So you tied up next Ogilvy for 6 million.
Yeah.
And how many square feet was that?
200,000. Yeah, you're right. It's a tiny amount of money. But we promised to keep the store open.
Was that important to the seller?
It was everything to the seller.
Who was the seller?
It was another Montreal-based family.
Okay. Okay.
And they cared a lot because they were the second owners in history. 1866, the store opened, and this was the second family in history to own it. And so they cared about the people. And the man who ran the store and created it, the man who of that second family who was 50 years a leader, he was gaunt, but his nephew was controlling the estate and wanted to keep the 400 employees and wanted to keep the traditions. And we
400 employees in there?
Yeah.
Wow. What was the name of this family that had run this?
I think I better not say.
Oh, okay. Okay. And okay, 400 employees, 200,000 square feet, tied up for 6. And then this time to tie it up, did you have to like put up the one that you guys had, or was it?
I can't remember, but I think it was pretty similar. I mean, we knew we had real money this time.
Okay.
But whether, you know, the whole idea of these things, tie them up without putting hard money down.
Yeah.
And they go on intervals. So where you say, okay, I'll do it. And the seller goes, okay, I'll give you 30 days. But then you better come up with some money if you want to hang in. So I can't remember the structure of that, but you could be pretty sure we didn't have a lot of money at the bat, you know, when we finally went hard.
Okay.
But what we had to do is find a partner. And lo and behold, we did. Somebody who was in the retail business but liked real estate. And our thought early on was that we would have to convert a lot of the selling departments to rental. We understood the rental model. We didn't understand owning a company that rented a whole building, but we did understand that if you could rent a few of the spaces, if you pay it, you know, do the math. If you're paying $6 million, if you could find yourself $600,000, that'd be a 10% return.
Yep.
If we could find one guy like a Louis Vuitton to give us, you know, $60 a foot on 10,000 feet, that'd pay for the building.
And that's that was the goal.
The chart math was really simple. We could rent the ground floor at the market rate, and that'd pay for the building. But we have to keep the whole thing going. So we decided that we would lease as many boutiques in the store as we could, which ended up being 50, which ended up taking about 350 employees, which we were able to transfer to the new people coming in to take over departments. And we kept the 3 most profitable ones for ourselves.
So transfer all the operational risk by leasing it all up and the overhead of the staff Was that common to kind of do this
I think it was maybe the first time it was ever done
in Montreal?
anywhere.
Nice. So that's called store in a store.
Store within a store.
Yeah.
I walked through the bay yesterday morning or 2 mornings ago. I went to a breakfast with Pierre Poliev, and it happened to be in the adjacent tower to the bay. And when I left the session, it was probably 10 o'clock. And so I walked through the bay. And sure enough, for example, and that is apparently, 6 doors that they're trying to keep, which will never happen. And you walk through the bay, and sure enough, they've always had a wacky amount of Boss merchandise. Well, of course, the Boss store was being packed up. Why? Because that's not the bay. It's a store within a store. They never said it. But that's why they had such big stores, because that's one way Boss was selling their merchandise. So they may not have a Boss store in Toronto like they do in Paris or other places, but they're putting so much merchandise in these stores that they're actually owning their own fixtures, they're owning their own merchandise. And so when the company says, oh, we're going bankrupt, they're in there as fast as they can, getting their merchandise out. They don't need it sold through Hudson Bay cash registers, and then they got to chase the scoundrels that own that store to try to get their money back. So anybody, you could tell the next day in a bay store who was in a store in a store and who was in the bay. Seeing who was packing up.
Yeah, all the sub-leases that their transactions go through.
Sure. Like in our day, we knew that shoes have always been an important component of the retail gain at Montreal. And we were able to get this husband and wife team out of New York, Joan and David. But in order to get them here, we had to pay for their plane to come up and bring their miniature dog with them. But you had something that nobody else had. We had Joan and David shoes. We also ended up wanting some of the best brands in the world, and to get the best clothing brands, Valentino, Versace, we partnered with a woman in Toronto who had a store in Hamilton Lanes, and she was able to get these designers to come and do stores in Montreal. Otherwise, we, as these little pikers, would have never been able to get them. But we were able to get these people into our store. We found this phenomenal perfume lady named Annette Brutal in Paris. She only had a little bit of sales going out of Renfrew. We built her a little boutique. She's a former pianist like my wife. And so the big thing on her was if you looked at her collection of perfumes, they're kind of laid out like a piano or like an organ, like a great organ. And, there are moments like that our whole thing was we have to distinguish ourselves. We have to go find the best brands. We have to put them in our store. I don't know, I guess you have the enthusiasm of youth, the idea that if somebody didn't do it before, then it was a really good idea. You were looking to create, and that's the way we felt. I think we were, we all had the same goals in mind. We're not worried about our overhead. Maybe we can pay for our food and have an apartment and maybe rent a car, but we want to build wealth. And that was why we did things the way we did.
What were the 3 that you guys kept?
Menswear, ladies' accessories, which is the most profitable thing you can sell.
Like scarves?
Scarves, mittens, gloves, that whole nine, all that stuff that men generally don't give a crap about. But there you don't have a lot of markdowns, and your margins are high, unlike fashion, which goes out of style every season, basically. And the other one was cosmetics. And so, at the end of the day, those 3 good bargains made more profit than the entire store when we bought it. But the sales in the building probably went up 4 times from what they were selling before to what we were selling when we finished the store within the store concept.
That's crazy. It's kind of like a party. Like I threw a lot of parties in my day, and the big thing about when you're making a party is making sure you have the right people attending for other people to want to come. It's like a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yeah, I hesitate to say this, but maybe that's why when I met you for the first time, I was so attracted. Probably. because you were doing the same thing. You were creating this in the food space. And I knew when Ivanhoe and Cambridge decided that, Place Marie needed to redo basically its entire ground floor, which in the day had been, when it was created, it was really the start of the underground. And they had some of the cool fashion stuff. We became just a dead end addenda to what then became the underground. And we were nothing but a collection of, hot dog stands and old lingerie makers and stuff that were, service maybe in the day, but were eclipsed by a million times by all the rest of the retail. And this concept of taking 40,000 feet and doing something new with food. I remember walking through the temporary thing that had been set up, and I saw this guy walk with a black T-shirt walking through with an entourage, and I said to the guys I was with from our company, I said, I bet that's the guy that put this together. Sure enough, that was you. And I had many to that point, but when I saw the creativity of the concept, I always have been particularly fond of donuts, if that's not obvious by taking a look. And, there was a guy making fresh donuts. I thought that was the coolest thing ever. And then there's a Tulum Mexican thing, and that was long before I'd ever been to Tulum in my life. And, just had concepts that were attracting people that were ahead of what everybody else was trying to sell people. And then you see who's buying this stuff. And then, it's really, I thought that, maybe that's what attracted me. It was, here's somebody that's thinking forward and thinking of the next thing and not just trying, so often in real estate, the people that are actually involved in leasing the space, they're just filling up space. Owners don't think like that. I'll never forget, we looked at one point I was looking to buy at Trizet. We bought a company based in Los Angeles. They had some really great stuff. They were a public company, and everybody was touting their praises. And when I was doing the tours of the properties, I was on a building in Wilshire Boulevard that was a rectangular building, and it was maybe 20 stories high. But when you got to, say, the third or fourth floor, there were these huge patios on either end of the floor, because it was like a wedding cake building that stepped back. And touring with the leasing manager, somebody said to me on that floor with a big balcony, or a big patio, the person said, well, we're in negotiations with Abercrombie and Fitch. I thought, whoa, that's interesting. But I'm thinking, well, wait a sec. If they're going to sell clothes out of here, like at a wholesale level, this patio, I mean, you're going to have cocktails out here. You're going to people come to see the new line. All of it. That's fine. If you're going to have accounts, that's another story. So it mattered who was going in there, right? Because if it was Abercrombie that was going to be selling stuff out of there, and they thought that was a cool selling environment, you're paying like marketing, like Fifth Avenue money. But if they're just a bunch of accounts and it's back office space, they're paying the market rate maybe for commodity space. The person in charge of leasing the space did not know the answer. And I immediately thought, geez, these people aren't managing the buildings the way the world says they are. They're just like, their budget is $20 and they're going to get 20. But that tenant might have paid 50.
Yeah.
Because it totally mattered. They didn't know the answer. And now those are the fundamental things that you learn on the ground by walking and talking. And it's kind of amazing that the person you're asking the questions of aren't even clever enough to say, that's confidential, or we don't discuss that yet. They're just like, they're telling you everything. And you know why? They might be working for you because you're touring the space, right? And so, so much of our business is still about being in a constant conversation, to be learning and
Just being curious. Yeah, I've noticed that just by asking questions and then following up, in marketing, they call it the 5 W's.
Yeah.
Who, what, where, why, and when. You keep asking one of these questions and you just like unravel the whole story. People like talking about themselves. They like telling you the whole story. So, yeah.
So that whole day long, and that's another thing, when you're leasing space, you're looking for the growth guy. And I can remember here we owned the building in the Trizet days. We owned the building, which was known as the Air Canada building. acquire Beaver Hall Hill and Randy-Levesque. And we had a tenant, and the guy who owned the company was a guy named Rory Olson, who had a bit of a real estate background. That tenant started at 4,000 feet and grew to 100,000 feet. There's nothing better that could ever happen to you as a lessor of office space than finding a growing tenant, especially if you have room. And if you have a big building that's multi-tenanted, you have coming and going. And you could make money on the guy that decides to leave early, and you can make money on the guy that wants to expand, because the guy that wants to expand is already there. And you don't want to gouge him, but just the same, he's going to pay more than the next guy because it's adjacent to a space, it's location. And so you try to work out something that's fair. But you don't have to run around searching because your growth is right there. And so you should talk to your tenants every day. Here's one of the astounding statistics that I think it was maybe year 15 in my career, and I'm sure it's no different today. It is different in one respect. The average lease term that people were signing up for was 7 years. The average firm needed absolutely to have more space or less space within 3 years. Think of that. Think of that and the opportunity that represents. If you can't accommodate their growth, they need to buy their way out of the last 4 years. If you can accommodate their growth, then whatever term you're down to becomes a longer term. And once you lease up a building, your biggest expense then is downtime when people leave, and or it's re-tenanting the vacant space, which in those days was $30 a foot. It's $200 a foot today, because half of the new money is technology. You ever notice it? In the old days, you guys say, hey, PJ, why don't you and me switch offices? Fine. You leave your stuff there. I walk down with my paper. Now we got to move your computer, their computer, who's plugged into this guy. You're moving constantly. They're constantly, we always are trying to make space more flexible. Never today, it's technology. And so if you're going to create something, you're going to create it with the latest technology, which is different than 2 years ago. So that aspect of the cost, never mind the materials and labor and all the rest of it, has made moving just such a, while rents haven't gone up, to compensate, it's just squeezing the landlord really. And so, it's just, that's just a simple thing that you learn over time. And so, in the day, people were just call it something like a sleep at the switch. I mean, we've gotten a lot better, but I think that the thing that never leaves my mind is how poor we are overall as an industry in managing the things that have already been built. Mm-hmm. It's astounding.
Yeah.
Undermined how they are. Yeah. And there's so much room for improvement and so much value to be created, as you said, by being curious. You have people reading off the sheet of paper what things are worth or what they'll sell it for. You're already dead.
So to go back to Ogilvy, you had 50 stores within the store. You kept the top 3 profitable. I know you pulled it off as a great success. Ogilvy still exists. Holt Renfrew bought Ogilvy. It's like the big flagship, so everyone knows what it is. And this store-in-a-store model is replicated all over. How did you guys pull it off? Did you found a partner to partner with? But I mean, there's still a lot of CapEx going in to figure it out. I know there's also some story about the escalators that you bought thrifting. Can you talk to me a little bit about how you pulled it off?
I do think that the main element was a salesmanship of being able to go to, well, let me not confuse, just identifying things with creating things. When you look at the financials early on, you could see there was an 1,800-foot boutique selling clothes under the label Jaeger. And that 1,800 feet of a 200,000-foot building, they were doing 10% of the sales of the whole building. Okay. Jaeger, they're full line in. Can't remember the math exactly. They were doing an astounding amount of sales. It wasn't hard to figure out if you could have 10 Jaegers. And the way they did it wasn't really a store within a store. Yeah, I guess it was. They put their merchandise in, and they gave you 18%. So you provided staff and all the rest of it. You provided the space, but you got 18%. That's a lot of money. And when we saw that, we knew the answer. In a certain way, we didn't invent the answer because the answer was lying right there. That was a store within a store. It was really buried as a store within a store, and the lease wasn't really set up. It wasn't really a lease. It was just a percentage of sales, but it was that outsider bringing in the merchandise and made sure it was a full line all the time. Whereas if I was buying somebody's merchandise, next thing you know, I have no more mediums. Yeah, or I have this color, but not that color because I can't afford all that. But if you're actually the wholesaler, he can bring it in. He can steal from a shipment that's going to San Francisco and direct it to Montreal. He can always keep that as a flagship store. So if you had a whole bunch of flagship stores, you were better equipped than any department store to offer the right thing to the customer. But so the key thing was looking in the store, who can we keep and transfer to that kind of thing, and then finding those things that would set you apart. And that's why we went out of our way to get the high-end designers to make a statement. That's why we went to get Joe and David for shoes. Our partner at the time happened to have a couple lines that he was importing, Escada and Mondi from Germany. And I can remember, myself buying Mondi suits, and people would go, Mondi? And you go, yeah, they're German brand, nice things. And this guy had brought them in, and he had, 18, 19 stores in North America. He had all the leases in the right corner of his desk, and none of them signed. He was very proud that he had never signed a lease, never signed it. That's another, that's what a lot of other people want to do. As long as you're in the space and don't get kicked out, it's like, okay, what are the rules? Well, I we didn't really sign it, so I'm going to stick my signing board in the middle of your hall. You go, well, I'm not allowed out of the lease today. Well, you didn't sign a lease. So, well, we like to sign a lease. And he's just sort of, it's like used to say in French, is difficult to catch as a barge soap in the bathtub. And could never get the guy to sell a lease, to sign a lease. But, he was super clever. But, by in there, you got a brand that, Scada ended up with their own store on Sherbrooke Street. And just to convince him to come as a tenant was a big job. And calling back, no, we want to be, no, it's like, give it a shot, try it. And he actually didn't bring Monty in. He brought his brand below it, Laurel. But I can remember calling that guy on the phone in my office with another one of my partners. I remember calling him after we're a tag team of partners. And after different guys got no's, then the next guy would get a shot at him. And I remember talking to the guy, and I remember him saying, okay, we'll give Laurel a shot. Those are the moments when, this is what it's about.
Yeah, so that was like a big hustle. Everyone in the office, you guys were all young, giving him a call sequentially until he finally says yes. And then I guess he wanted to make sure you guys were going to deliver something of a high standard before putting his premium brand.
Yep.
So in terms of like the renovations, what was the state of the store at the beginning?
Oh God, the state of the store. I mean, is what you could imagine. When we bought it, there were still elevator operators in the elevators, human beings. And it's hard to imagine today with their little stool and
With the thing like that?
it was the thing. Oh wow, going thing and the little gate that would close.
Okay, like full Titanic mode.
It was incredible. And for a long time, there's bagpiper that came in and played every day at noon.
The bagpiper?
Yeah, it's a Scottish family that owned it, and they had a bagpiper every day. Okay. Every day. And at Remembrance Day, you at 11 o'clock, everything goes silent, bagpiper. We had these traditions. People loved that. And so it was a question of bringing in the modern world of fashion, which they had always done in the modern way, I guess, with these boutiques. But at the same time, keeping the traditions that sort of kept the store together. But we had to make enormous changes. It didn't have escalators. So we decided you had to put escalators in all the way up. And we would take road trips, New York City. And, half the time you're pretending you're Duran Duran in the lawn limousine. And the other half of the time you're going like, I'd love to have sax. but I can't afford that. I can't afford the woodwork, on one floor, so sure, that was a big job.
And so the road trips to New York were to get inspiration.
Yeah. So you walk through, you'd spend 2 days, you'd hope there was a fun element somewhere in it, but it was basically wearing out your shoes, going through from Century 21 to Off-Price store, looking at their merchandise, to going through FAO Schwartz to see how a real toy store is done, or going through Bendel's at the time, which ultimately went out of business, or going through any of the boutiques on Fifth Avenue or Madison Avenue, Upper East Side. The Upper West Side was not what it is today when we were doing that. But going through the big department stores who had gone through, this is one thing that really is part of the story, is that we never really counted on the turnover. Every time a store is not doing well, you want to get a turnover, but every time costs a fortune. And then every few years, you have to do something to the environment overall. It's not like the old days was sign a 10-year lease, say, nice to meet you, nice to sign up with a tenant, and then go back in year 9 and ask him if he wants to stay. That was tenant relations when I started. Now it's like every other week, hey, Johnny, can we go for a coffee? Oh, yeah, Mildred left this week. Oh, gee, the jeans didn't come in. Like, you're inside the tenant's head. When it fails, you knew it was on its way to fail. In those days, you just got a lease signed, and that was their problem. You owned the building. It became what we learned was it was not a classic environment where you lease and go away. There was a lease and stay involved. And so there was a lot of capital required. First of all, there's the base capital that took to do escalators, fill in the hole where the stairs were to the basement. And we did, there was a performance hall upstairs, Tudor Hall, could seat 200 people, watch a performance. It was one of the largest performing halls in the town. We kept that tradition alive, takes money.
So what's the story with the escalators?
Oh, I guess it's pretty simple. The first set of escalators was, stairs to the basement, not a good idea. We leased a basement to Marshall and Spencer for $1 million a year. And think about that. We paid $6 million for the building. Now they're leased at $1 million.
You're already at a 15 cap.
But their store was being demolished to make way for a shopping center on the corner of McGill College and St. Catherine. And Marshall was had to go to business for 3 years. So we went to see him and said, well, what about if you go in our basement? And they go, that'd be phenomenal. So there comes the idea of the escalators, etc. Well, where we got the escalators from was Marks and Spencer's store.
The one that was closed?
Yeah, that was closing, because we could buy them for like $10,000 per escalator, when they cost $200 to buy. Pretty good, right? You get kind of clever.
Yeah.
So we had to close St. Catherine Street, and they have these trucks taking these escalators down the street. They deliver them to our store. And I don't know, I think it was the next morning at 6 o'clock, and somebody says, hey, Tresh, a bit of a problem here. They're 2 feet too short. I'm like, and you could think of that, the angle, like they couldn't sit like this, and they couldn't go like dangle like that. And so, well, what's the solution, you guys? Well, we'll build a little platform here, 300 square feet of where they can land, and then you walk 2 steps.
So you go up, and it's just not high enough, so you make a little base platform before entering.
Yeah. So you actually go down. So you come in, you go down the escalator.
Yeah.
Okay. But then it lands on a platform.
Okay.
And so we put a Crabtree and Evelyn store on a platform. Everybody goes, wow, that's the best idea I've ever seen. As soon as we're there's a little store, but then you're on a platform and you can overlook the whole basement, which has like 13-foot ceilings. So that's perfectly fine. And you're going, yeah, that was a pretty clever thing, eh?
So
but they're not saying it's not a clever thing. That was a solution to a big ass problem, in that we screwed up on measuring the escalators. Absolute true story. The amount of compliments that we got up for that platform, which is still there today, were insane. It was my mom's old saying, necessity is the mother of invention. That invention, the platform, was pure necessity. There was nothing clever about it. It was it was like, oh, how are we gonna fix this one? And of course, the rest of the elevators, we learned a lesson too, because one of my partners at the time was like, I don't care what it costs, but we need to be open on, Friday. I think it cost us an extra $100,000 to move the installation up by a week. I'm like, dude, you can't do that. I mean, it might feel like you got to do it today, but you got to do things in a measured way. But he wasn't really a measured guy. And so, whatever money I made buying used the escalators, he blew because we had to, open on Friday, not Monday. But that's like every development job, has those moments. That's why you can't delegate a development job. Ever try to do a construction job and show up once a month? The doors are in the wrong place. The HVAC's in the wrong place. I mean, people get building and they just keep going. And they think that's, but we all know we've renovated a basement or a house or a porch or you name it. I haven't heard anybody ever say, geez, it went perfectly.
Yeah.
I had a friend at my house from Paris last week, and I swear to God, one day, 2 hours. So they're working on his country house. I don't know what they did, but it was the end of the world. And the contractor's on the phone and they're that's just construction and development.
So funny enough, in hospitality, there's these like fancy terms. I actually learned it from a consultant that was tasked by Ivanhoe to give a big report on the feasibility of timeout and what became the CAF car. And he said this thing, said, what's really important? You need to have grand welcome statement.
Okay.
And so this platform is like a welcome statement because you're actually overlooking above and you have this great view. It's really smart. And it's an accident. So you pulled it off, opened on time. You had a 15 cap just with Marks and Spencer, and then the rest did well. And the 3 you kept were super profitable. At that point, did you guys, like, I guess, take the proceeds, refi, or you just went on to tie up the next thing?
Just got to add 2 things. We had 3 leases in Cadillac Fairview shopping centers. We closed down those 3 stores because we weren't making enough money. But Cadillac Fairview paid us $1 million to get the stores back.
Like what? You weren't making money, but they paid you to get the lease?
Yeah. Good. Very successful shopping centers.
Okay.
Lake Fairview, Point Third.
What's that one?
And they could lease it to somebody else at a higher rent.
Okay.
So we got $1 million from Jim Bullock, who was the head of that at the time. And then they had a store in Yorkville selling linens under the Ogilvy name. It was maybe 2,500 feet. And we shut our store, and then we subleased that space to somebody for another 7 or 8 years. And the difference between what we were paying in rent and what that subtenant paid it was also $1 million over the 7 years. So of the $6 million, by the way, Marks and Spencer, we had done this lease for a term, and then we thought, oh, gee, they really want to come. So we called them and said, we need a welcome check also. So we need an extra $1 million for the welcome check.
The welcome check covers the first year. It's just the payment.
It's just extortion. and they said, okay. And I remember full well picking the check up in Toronto and staying in the King Edward Hotel that night because it was another famous $1 million day. But that's it, got down to 3 on those 3 things before we ever did one thing.
So the arbitrage of the sublease in Toronto, getting out of Point Claire from Cadillac,
2 other shopping centers,
and then
Marks and Spencer,
and then just piling on a welcome tax to Marks and Spencer. Okay,
$3 million.
That's half the whole project to close, but then you needed to renovate, or was it 6 all in?
No, but that's renovation. There's a large mortgage that we ended up taking for a lot of the renovation, and really at the end of the day, the real estate project didn't make us any money. We ended up selling the debt, selling a whole package for next to nothing, because the capital costs of maintaining that real estate was really eating up that profit you would have had from rent being so much more than your expenses. But all that rent money needed to go back in the form of capital.
So there's so much deferred maintenance and
so much deferred maintenance and so much of this turnover. So if I had to re-tenant a 2,000-foot boutique and I had to give the guy hundreds of thousands of dollars for him to build out his new store, that was coming right out of our pocket. And that was happening so often that, thank God that the 3 departments we kept made money, because that was actually worth millions of dollars. at the end of the day.
And is that why, like, I'm assuming the, you know, Joan and David shoes and the Paris perfumery, I'm sure that wasn't really hard covenants, or like it was kind of like more come join us, and if there's a turnover, were they actually paying the rest of their lease, or it was kind of pointless?
These people paid their rent.
Okay.
But probably if you were a lender and you were lending and the only thing you had was Nick Goutal paying your rent or Joan and David, that's not like Jaeger paying you the rent, or that's not like the Forks company at the time, or that's not like, you know, Estee Lauder paying for their space. It's not the same kind of guarantee or covenant, as we would say. And we had some of that. That wasn't really the issue. I guess it is the issue in a certain way, because as those tenants are failing, you have to replace them and you can't go after them for the rent. It's not like a Marks and Spencer corporate thing. So that's probably true. But I think what's more true is that, you know, why the timeout concept works so well is that person renting the space from the landlord, timeout, that's their job. They pay you rent on the whole thing. If they have a fish guy that's not working, they're able to find another fish guy. I'm happy because they're putting on a good product. I'm collecting a rent check from timeout, not from individual people. That's the big distinction. If you're running your own, you know, you have seen these food marts around, like you see some of them now. You can see them in Montreal, you know, and there's 40 mom and pops in there. I just look at that and I go, that's blood, sweat, and tears. Because at any given time, there's 6 of them. They put everything they have into that. It's not working. Now you're dealing with a distraught owner, life savings going up in flames. That's not good for your health to deal with that.
Yeah, a lot of brain damage.
It doesn't matter who you are. It's painful.
Yeah.
And we had some of that going on at OV too. You know, a furniture guy who put together this whole concept. It's not selling, you know, it's not Leon's, and it's not, you know, it's not a high-end furniture merchant, you know, in Montreal. But it's a guy who's put together this concept. You know, the funny thing about department stores is this is the absolute fact. Sales drop in half for every floor you go up. So if you're selling, you know, if you're selling $1,000 foot on the main floor, maybe $10, maybe $100 feels okay in rent. You know, but that $100 goes to 50, to 25, to 12.5, to 6. Those upper floors are not worth a lot of money at that point. So if you do your math thinking there's some relationship, like the rent goes down by what, 80% by the time you get to the top. I don't think that took us a while to figure that out. So really our initial thinking, you know, just leave the whole store empty and just rent the ground floor. If I were to do this over, I would have created 3 floors of really cool office with an atrium in the middle, and I released it as cool office. I always wanted to put a floor on top because I thought a floor on top as pure office would be phenomenal. Still today, you'd have views. But we create a side entrance with an elevator. That would have been a better solution, because renting the top 2 or 3 floors is never been able to get rent out of those floors. So we kind of sort of said, hey, if somebody else thinks they can do better with this concept, we need to get out of Dodge.
Okay. So then you flipped it, and then you're back to your story of your third deal.
Yeah.
Which is the Ritz-Carlton.
Yeah.
And now we're, you know, Windsor 85. This happens. You're probably close to the early 90s.
Yeah, we're in the early 90s.
With interest rates going.
Yeah, through the roof. And really, you know, the Ritz was really about, okay, you got a hotel, but all your money is going to be in this new expansion of condos. We couldn't pull that off. And we ended up, the Ritz, going back to the creditors. And the equity partners that we had brought in lost their money. We lost our own money. Eventually, you know, residential units did get built. They never really sold for what they thought they would sell them for. So I don't think that was really a success either. The hotel, we finally did find a buyer for the hotel. And they were happy to come into Montreal. They did a complete gut rehab of the hotel. But honestly, in my view, didn't change it enough. It's really it's the same layouts, the same room layouts, the same restaurant layouts, pretty much, right? The outside garden, really nothing's changed that much, except it's different and it's refreshed. And it still gets its audience, but it didn't really modernize
How long did you guys own that hotel?
I think we might have been in for call it 4 years ish.
And interest rates at the time,
They were crazy.
how much?
Oh, low teens, I guess. Yeah, when we did the Windsor, they were 16 or 17%. That was bad enough. I mean, it wasn't that those were rates were spiking then.
Okay.
Yeah, like 89-ish kind of thing. By the time you got to the early 90s, it was just picking up the pieces of everybody having gone bankrupt, including basically Trizac, Oxford, you name it. One way or another, everybody was working out. And we were trying to sell that hotel into that market.
Okay. And so it was really hard to get a transaction through.
Possible.
And you're bleeding money every month.
We might.
How did that feel? How was that?
Brutal. One of our investors was Gale and Weston because we went to see them because we wanted to merge Ogilvy and Holtz.
Back then?
Yeah.
Because they ended up doing that. Like,
Yeah, because he looked at us and we thought we had another nice Montreal family like the two other that we had dealt with on Windsor and Ogilvy. But we didn't. We had a shark, I mean, like a Knight's Clothing, Weston. So he gave us $10 million. But he had a right to sell it back to us
wait, did he give you 10 million for what?
as a equity interest in the Ritz-Carlton.
Okay. And you had a right to get it back?
Yeah, he had a right to force us to buy him back. We had to give him back.
That's a line of credit.
Kind of. We had to come up with the money. So he gave us 10, but when he wanted it back, we had to come up with the money to buy him back.
Okay. Yeah.
But we couldn't.
Obviously. You're asking him for equity.
He went beggar.
Okay. So he would haul on it and you couldn't.
Yeah, we couldn't believe it. What's 10 million to him? Especially that we went bankrupt. New guys came in, that's okay. But then he turned around and we met him because we were trying to do Ogilvy Holtz. And they go, no, Ogilvy Holtz. But we now met this rich guy. So when we're buying the Ritz, we go to see this rich guy. And he goes, yeah, that's cool. I'll come in. But when it came time to kill us, he was happy to kill us. He just killed us. He killed us, our other equity partners, which was another wealthy Montreal family. And then when we're dead and somebody else owns the Ogilvy store, then he merges it. Because he thought that real estate on St. Catherine Street or on Sherbrooke Street was going to be worth a lot of money, which turned out not to be, because you need a use to have value. It still doesn't have a use. As new owner now, but still no tenants. You know, you would hope you could create something would want to take a significant amount of space on Sherbrooke Street. But, you know, most of that stuff on Sherbrooke has failed, almost everything, even the existing retail. So, you know, you thought, but no, it didn't happen. And they haven't had a successful run on Mountain in St. Catherine. What is it? People ask me today, what is it? What is it? I don't know. You know, on the one hand, it feels like maybe it's Bloor Street or maybe it's New York. On the other hand, there's never any people in it. And then everything you see is when I go there, I go on it's 50% off and they got the full line of everything. It means they didn't sell much of it at 100.
Yeah.
And I think that old Renfrew rule works on Bloor Street. Holt Renfrew doesn't work in downtown Montreal. Of course, in the 70s, these two cities had the same population. Now, we're half of Toronto. Sad but true. And whatever people look at our city from afar and they go, oh, wow, that's beautiful. And they see a Ferrari and they see an F1, now they see a Four Seasons. They don't understand the customer base. Our wealthy customers, they're shopping in New York, they're shopping in Florida, maybe a bit less, but probably not. And maybe they're going to go shop at some of the stores out at the 1040, but not in the way they hope anytime soon. That's going to be 10 or 12 years or something long to get established as something till you're at a run rate. And this Ogilvy name will disappear shortly is my guess. There's no Ogilvy left. Those two stores had a different culture day one. at boat run through, when you walked in, they look at what you were wearing. It worked in the day. Today, guys walk in looking like you, and they fall all over you because they think you're some tech guru. In the day, when a guy like you walk into the place, they would say, "Oh, I think you might be in the wrong store, sir." Like you know, what's her name in that red dress movie there with Richard Gere, you know, Julia Roberts.
Yeah.
You know, that she didn't really, well, you know, that's the way it was in Montreal. You walk in the Holt, I was never feeling good about walking in the Holtz, but walking in Ovi was like, hey, you know, it was a different feel.
More accessible. The other one was more.
It was British, but the French Canadians thought that was true. But Holt Renfrew was always snob. And, you know, I think that snob works perfectly well on Bloor Street. It does. But it doesn't really work here because there's not enough of those customers around.
How did your relationship with doubt change as you got more experienced?
My relationship with doubt?
You know, like sometimes when I'm looking at an opportunity or I'm looking at a situation, I have a lot of gusto and I think I can pull it off. But there's always like an element where I'm wondering, is this doable? Does this make sense? And then there's a confirmation that happens where I go, no, I can or I can't. And over time, as you got more experience, how has your relationship with doubt and facing adversity, how has it changed?
That's a really great question. And I'd like to say that it hasn't really changed. And I think you might think that I find today I might have more doubts about things that I do than I ever had before. Not less, more. But my challenges have grown, which is super lucky. So, you know, I think the first big thing that changes, I'll never forget, is when I took a mortgage. I couldn't speak. I never wanted to owe anybody anything, ever. I think my father taught me that. He had a credit card for emergencies, but you didn't buy anything on time. You paid cash for your car because he lived through a moment of the Second World War where he went away to fight. His father passed away. He had four brothers and sisters, and he sent all his checks home, but when he came home, they were still penniless, his family. And I think it just taught him, like, you know, you don't borrow money. It could only be a bad thing. And so we never did. But, you know, I bought a house with my wife who, you know, so we were two people doing okay. But the idea that you had to come up with X amount of money every month, and I think rates were actually 16% in our first mortgage. My youngest son, bought his first place. Rates were 2%. Just think about that. And so I think, you know, then you start to go, oh boy, it's maybe not doubt, but risk. You become more risk averse. And therefore, when you're at difficult moments, I think you have a higher level of anxiety. We didn't see rates. We never thought about rates when we were doing those deals. And because we had to do them. So we were just going to work till we did them. It was really simple. You didn't have to go home at 6 o'clock at night to bear your share of raising the family. You didn't have to, you know, worry about, gee, did I make enough money to take a vacation? And that, you know, the gang we were 4 or 5 guys. I don't think any of us got married before we were 34, 35, because we wanted to be we all just say financial independence. Well, yeah, for sure, if you could get the financial independence, but how about just get into a place where you can comfortably cover your overhead, which I think a lot of humans don't ever get to.
So it was as you added on life responsibilities.
That's the biggest change in your life. To me, it's not, and so when you talk about doubt, that's what causes you to question yourself. So you add responsibilities, you hit a recession, you're losing, you know, you thought you were worth X, you're now worth half of X or some crazy number like that, and you go and you say, oh my God. We never said that, oh my God, ever. When I was just with a bunch of guys eating together every night. You pay the bill because you came late, or, we foot for it. It's just, you're totally immersed in your business stuff. But when you got to start worrying about your family, your kids, your mom and dad, life takes on a different dimension. Now, I can't underemphasize the moment of having your own children, where people would regularly say, "Bill, you've become such a better person." And I'm like, "What are you talking about? I've always been a great person." And they were like, "Well, maybe not really. You were really not very patient. You're really, like they talk about Carney having this volcanic temper. Well, shame on him at his age to have a volcanic temper. Shame on him." Because you learn that doesn't get you anywhere, particularly in your interrelationships. You change. Your children make you change. They say your children are your best teachers in the world. It's absolutely true. You can't threaten to hit your child. Madeline told me that, because if you ever hit the child, I'm leaving. But you can't threaten things without carrying them out, so therefore you can't threaten the child. I didn't think about that, because my dad hit me whenever I wasn't a good guy. Pull out the belt and get whacking away. That was his way, because he was trying to, it wasn't because he was trying to make us better people. I don't hold that against them. But so that makes risk harder, I think, having responsibilities. But doubt, like many things I'm involved in today, geez, I don't exactly know how we're going to really pull it off. I have complete confidence we're going to pull it off because of the team, because of the owner of our business, because of the people you're able to. One of the great moments in anybody's business career is when you're able to find the people to work with you, where you can be stronger as a team than you are as a collection of individuals.
So just to go from that, because, we're calling this first bricks for real estate, but it's also bricks to the face. You just walked us through kind of a cowboy start of making a string of successes, then getting a first brick in the face with Ritz-Carlton and the downfall of that. And then you had this storied career where you just rose through and did so many transactions, so many deals all over. Did confidence come from getting things right, or surviving the times where you got it wrong? Like did you knowing, no, I went through the 90s, like this is doable. If I went through that, I'm able to go through the next thing.
Yeah, that's also another really big question. I think if it only came from survival or getting through, it's not enough. You have to have wins, and you have to celebrate the wins. And it's one of the sad things about today. When we started, you celebrated every win because you earned it. And so, and you celebrated your losses. We used to have an expression when our hockey days is win or lose, hit the booze. And it's really pretty true, right? You have a big failure, you need to go out and get that failure off so you can get on with it tomorrow morning. So we would do that. We would lose big deals, and we'd stay up late. We'd have a cigar, and we'd be drunk, and we'd be back at it the next day. But if you won, it was the same. It was the same medicine. But you had some wins and losses. But definitely, what you definitely learn, perhaps in our business more so than any others, because from start of an idea to the cash out, it can be decades. But at any event, it's not a month, it's not 2 months, it's not a year. The average real estate development project is 7 to 10 years average, which means there's plenty at 20.
So you still need to live. You still need to kind of go through it.
So those really rough moments, and you have to get through. You have to get through downturns. Every development project goes through a downturn, because downturns happen more frequently than the average age of projects. So there will be a moment when you're like, why did I do that? Why didn't I sell that? Why do I have this kind of debt? But what you do realize over time is that there will be an end.
So bringing me to my next question, because you obviously got things right in many aspects, or you go through it another time, but you survived the times you got it wrong. At what point during your career did you stop needing the external validation to know you were on the right path?
I'm not sure he ever sucked, right? Because you're in a given challenge. You'd like to meet the challenge, but you might not. And so it doesn't matter where you've been before, whatever challenge you're in that day. I often say, I don't know anything other than I want to win. And whatever it is I want to win. I think my kids are a lot like that. I watch them go. They want to win. You know, I think there's really no substitute for wanting to win, because that's what makes you do the extra wind sprint. That's what makes you stay at the office till 8. That's what makes you say, hon, you know, I'm going to come 3 days late to the start of our holiday. I mean, you need to have a partner who understands and is prepared to live with your crap if you're going to go all out. You absolutely need that. And a lot of people don't have that. And does that going to make them any less happy? No. Might it make them have a lesser ability to create financial independence? Yeah, I think so. But different people have different needs, or all I ever want to do is give my children a better chance.
If you look back, what was your, game changer moment or game changer deal that you do the timeline and you go, this thing kind of changed the rest of my trajectory?
There were a few. And the common element of all of them was working with someone. I use the phrase, breathe confidence into you. So when somebody you respect says, you can handle that, to me, that's a phenomenal moment. If you respect that person, they give you authority to do something. They let you do something, whether you fail, sort of fail, succeed, really succeed. Those are the moments that it's like putting, not putting a regular gas and not putting super high test. It's like somewhat nitro, some other thing you never felt before. At least in my case, I don't want to make more money than the next guy. And whenever anybody says to me, but they make that, I say, I really wish you hadn't said that. It's like golf. You're playing against yourself. My dad always said, you have to play an individual sport, you have to play a team sport. So we played hockey, we played golf. And golf, all he ever did was watch to see how you handled your emotions. And you weren't playing against the guy, you're playing against yourself, because if you play your best game, you're going to beat him. Doesn't matter who it is. And I think that's the same way. Don't compare yourself to the next person. Compare yourself to everything you can be, which you should have the confidence to think that's pretty big. And so just do the absolute best you can. Set goals for yourself that might be reachable and they might not be reachable. So I think,
Like, if you had to name one or two.
I think the success that I had with a new CEO at Trizec, or we had moved to Chicago. Trizec had been on the rocks for a long time, including a period in which I was there. We made a change in leadership, and the person that came in to run the company was noted as a super talented person. But today he said, I've been watching you for a year and you should be my partner, was probably the biggest moment of my career. Why? Because we went on in 3 years to create several $1 billion of value for the shareholders, and I got part of it. And that was about, I could have shut the shop. I remember one of my friends saying to me, Tresh, don't forget, I'm the hare, I'm the tortoise. And what he was hitting. And he's right. He'd done very well for himself. He's my age. He's a phenomenal guy.
So you're talking about Tim Callahan?
Yeah. And I think when we sold the company, I think I was 49.
So you could have just stopped there.
Yeah. And that was the moment. And 15 years before that, I put my card in the ATM and nothing came out. That's a humbling moment. I never declared bankruptcy, but all of mine I thought I'd earned in the first, say, 15 years went up in smoke. So I think that's good. That's good for you. And if I didn't have a partner or wife at the time, I don't know if I would have survived. Maybe I would have. But I was, I was leaning on that relationship. I was leaning on that when I went to Chicago too, because the first couple of years down there was an absolute nightmare. Everything fell apart. It seemed the day I got there. But that was 2000. By 2002, we had a new CEO, and by 2006, we had sold. And a lot of the people that we had suffered, we were a gang, 5 or 6 that had suffered through a lot of it, and everybody went home independent.
That transaction was one of the biggest at the time.
At the time, it was one of the biggest ones. It was $10 billion.
And is there a moment that you can remember where you shouldn't have trusted your gut?
Oh, yeah.
Can you?
Well, you meet, you do spend your life making decisions about people, who your friends are going to be, who you're going to go on vacation with, who you really can't wait to have a coffee with on Saturday morning. And, sometimes people let you down. And what I find, in my case, the people that let me down are people that start to think in a tough situation, begin to think more of themselves than of the people they're in the situation with. And that happened to me twice in my life with the same person. And, those are the most difficult moments in your life, but in a certain way, they're easy, because once you make a decision, then you just move on, do the next thing. And so, I don't know, they have to be the most hurtful moments, at least the people I could relate to people for whom those are the most difficult moments in life. There are people, I'm sure, it's not the most difficult moment in life, but life is built on trust and affection. And when somebody breaks that trust mold, then I think life takes a different tenor. This isn't for yourself. Mark Carney's for himself. That's why I can't support the guy. I don't think Brian Mulrooney was for himself, whatever you want to say. That's why I ended up to love the guy. And it's pretty, the world won't work without trust, and it won't work without affection. And if people break those bonds, they're not worth. I'd had those moments. I think they've made me older, sadder, wiser.
What's the difference between ego and instinct? And how do you know which one's speaking?
Not exactly sure, but I guess I would say this in a quick moment. Instinct is a natural thing. Ego, and it is what it is. Ego is more, to me, a description of behavior than a character trait. Ego you can control, or you should be able to. Instinct you can't. It is what it is. And the less ego there is in the world and the more instinct, the better off we're going to be. I think it's an apple and an orange, ego and instinct.
Mm-hmm. Another thing that fascinated me as I got to know you, and I don't know if it's because of experience or age, was the fact that you're very outspoken, and whether you're here in front of a camera or walking on the street, talking to a teller at the store or to a future prime minister, you kind of always say it the way it is. And you kind of remind me of like a hockey coach that's like very to the point in a very direct manner. So one of the things that came up as I got to know you was LinkedIn was a way for you to kind of say your thoughts on commentary of politics, but also business deals and whatnot. And I was just curious if, like, is it because you're at a stage where you just don't care what people think, or how does that go through your mind?
You keep asking questions that are very pithy. I remember I thought an important moment for me was when I was seeking career advice in my early 30s, and I went to Chez Gauthier on Park Avenue with a very talented Quebec-born woman who now lives in New York and has had a incredible business and personal life. She said, "Bill, and I was making a change, and she said, I'll give you three pieces of advice. I wrote them down. I kept it in my wallet for 2 decades. I only remember one. And that is, it's not what you think you said that matters. It's what people heard. Well, I mean, that's like complicated. But it's important. But the best chance of people hearing is just making it simple and being consistent. If you start trying to think about the stories you told, meaning you weren't talking like I have today about my personal experience. The only thing I know is my personal experiences. I don't know the other things. I don't know what other people are thinking, etc. But I do know what I lived through and how I felt. And so the best, if I have any value, people can decide with what they hear. I just try to say the truth.
Your truth.
My truth. I try to say what I did, what I think, and they're allowed to do whatever they want with it. But I don't think I'm not, you massage what's coming out of your mouth when you're trying to, used to say, that person, they're not saying anything other than words that are trying to manipulate me into a certain direction. So many people, that's all they do all day long. They don't tell the truth. Like some people I thought were really dear friends spent their life trying to manipulate. I don't know what the truth is because I've seen them be so dishonest. Like, just say the truth. What's bothering you? What don't you like? 360 reviews, best thing that ever happened. If they're conducted right. Because you want to know what the people are all around you, above you, beside you, whatever it means. You want to know what people think. It's not a test. It's a chance to make yourself better. I just like to be able to say, and I don't want to be coerced by the rules of society or the idea that, these law firms that have kowtowed to Trump's extortion, it's hard to have respect. And maybe it's going to cost you $10 million. Maybe your firm's going to go in business. I think your principles should be more important. And I think you begin to speak your mind when you kind of know that, what could happen? Somebody could sue me, I guess. Maybe you just got to have enough assets in your wife's name. But, which a lot of real estate, that's pretty common practice. Or, maybe you have to think about, you can't go like these candidates that were kicked out. I mean, if you said something like they said, you should be kicked out. So if there's something I ever said that's that bad, then I deserve to suffer the consequences. But if I tell the truth about what I think about somebody, I don't think that can be, I don't think you can put your character or your financial well-being in jeopardy by saying what you think.
So I guess you're at a point where your financial jeopardy, your financial situation isn't put in jeopardy by what you say, but you're also from a different generation. I don't think there's a month that goes by that I don't get a screenshot from anyone around me who is religiously following your commentary for its, directness and how there is someone speaking their truth, like you said. And most of the time, for my generation, it's very kind of like, it's the first time we encounter that.
Yeah.
It's like, it's refreshing. It's also kind of exciting because we think someone's going to get in trouble, right? So I was always curious, like, if for you, this has always been the case throughout your life, or just now that there's a more social platform that allows to do that, it's
You know what I think about, and I think it's worth thinking about this. One of the roles I had, there was always a lot of people around, younger people around. And I thought the great moment for these younger people was when I was in a meeting with somebody really high placed at another company, and they were telling me how the world was going. And I would have 5 people sitting there, And I'd invite them so they could learn from an outside party. Go listen to me. I'm hoping I can connect you. And, people come in and they'd say, well, we think this is happening and this is going, this is it. And I look at these 5 people hoping somebody would ask a question. They don't ask a question. Well, they're intimidated, no? I don't care. They shouldn't be intimidated. They have a chance to talk to somebody. He's right there. The coach of the Toronto Maple Leafs. Ask him. You have the smartest guy in the real estate business from New York City. Ask him. That's for the sport. And after three quarters of watching this with the guys, I just said, boys, it happened to be old men. And that's the time they had come. If there's no questions, you're not getting invited back. Because the truth, we seek the truth. It comes in the exchange. It doesn't come in reading. What good is it if you read it and it goes in your head? It's only good if you then say it to the next person, or you validate what you think, or you discuss till you get to a little different place. It's the interchange that works. And I was chastised by the HR department and by a guy who reported to us like, gee, you can't really say that. And I'm like, well, I did. And if only one person learns from that, it's a success. If the other 4 are put off, good. Because maybe one day they'll realize that they're not going to get anywhere by listening and writing notes in a book. They're going to get somewhere by engaging. And heaven forbid any one of them has a real idea. Then they're going to understand that the great ideas come from everywhere. Yet it'd be easier to get in to see the CEO of a big American corporation with an idea than it is for some of my people at the same level to go down the office and talk to each other. Because they retreat. Life ain't about retreating. It's about being out there, exchanging, trying, failing, succeeding, meeting, traveling. It's about being on. We all want private moments. But you didn't go to work for private moments. You go to work with other people to come up with better solutions or better opportunities. It comes from group work. And always has and it always will. And that's why I have little patience and little fear. Because you know that there are always eureka moments. And so if you throw a computer or you throw something because you want people to wake up, it's because you can't find another way to wake them up. So, you're not going to throw it at their head. But I do these things so people will listen. Think about playing hockey. Think about skiing. You watch yourself ski and you go, yeah, I'm pretty good at this. And then you see it on film and you want to pretend it's not you. Or somebody films your golf swing and you think I have a buddy of mine, who watches me play 17 bad holes and he says, Tresh, you've been taking it back pretty flat today. And I'm like, you jerk. You watch me all day. Tell me on the first hole next time, not the 17th. But he's a great friend. I've known him my whole life, adult life. He knows my swing better than me. I want him to tell me what he thinks. I don't want him to watch me suffer all day long. But you're like, oh, gee, maybe Tresh doesn't want to hear it. My wife, she doesn't want to hear anything I have to say about golf. Right? I'm just trying to be helpful, honey. If you look, she doesn't want. I'm not saying. I learned from that. I'd like people to say exactly what they think all the time. That way, the exchange is valuable. And so I overemphasize, when you're deking a guy and you want to fake a guy out, you have to fake harder than you think you need to fake to get him to move. If you're going to learn to ski, you have to bend your knees more than you think. You have to lean forward more than you think. You have to put your hands out more than feels natural. So if you raise your voice, or if you're, maybe I'll have a harsh tone in your comments. One of the guys I respect most in the industry, he's perfectly happy to say that's stupid. Well, maybe kids today don't hear that enough. That's a stupid idea. It doesn't mean you're an idiot. It doesn't mean you're stupid. It means that's a stupid idea. Maybe he said you're stupid. Could you just have enough confidence to know that he's saying that's a stupid idea? He's looking for an exchange. The smartest people have the biggest ears. They're learning every day. And when they're tired of you, it's because they're not learning anything. And they're going to learn it somewhere else. Fine. Maybe he only needs to say one sentence. And maybe he's going to say one sentence to 100 people instead of 100 sentences to you. The world's going to be better off. Just listen. Listen to find that thing that can help you evolve your own thinking. Listen. Don't listen, which for most people is just waiting to talk. Listen to learn. Don't listen to absorb. Listen to say it back. Did I get that right? You always just think the guy in the first row asking the questions was the idiot. Thank God, because most of the people in the class didn't have the balls to ask the question. Just do it. We want to know. We want to know. And so we have to behave. Yes, we do. We have to behave in a way that the people are going to hear it. But if you do everything you can to sort of follow the rules to want them to hear it and they don't, maybe you have to act up a bit. I'd much rather have the person that acts up and says exactly what they think. If I am looking at people, they're saying what I think I want to hear, that's the biggest waste of time ever. In fact, that's a big negative. I want to know what they think. Well, none of us, nobody here. The most successful people are the people that listen the most.
Thanks so much for coming. Do you think we could do a second part?
It's my absolute pleasure. Maybe I'm at the age where talking is okay. I'm happy to do this anytime it suits you.
And is there anyone that you could think of that we should talk to next to kind of get their first deals, their first failures, their first breaks to the face?
Yeah, you asked me that. I've been thinking about it. I promise I'll deliver. Okay. But I don't have it on the tip of my tongue.
Okay. Thanks for coming.